Hello, people! In this lesson, we will focus on the pandas documentation, often contextually referred to as the docs. We'll introduce its structure and show you how to use it efficiently. Before we begin, let me point out that like any other massively used technology, the pandas library is constantly upgraded. To reflect this, its documentation and website are regularly updated as well. So, in case you are currently working on a newer version of these tools, please only consider the essence of our presentation and disregard any visual or organizational differences. That said, there are several ways to access the pandas documentation. The first one is going to pandas.pydata.org. Then, you can click on any of the underlined links to obtain it online. This is what you'd normally do, as we always prefer reading up-to-date information. But, in case you want to be on the safe side, you can also download the PDF version by selecting this link over here. See? To go to the main page, we'll go back a step and then click on this link to the documentation. Here we are. Very good. An alternative way to reach the same page is to just search for pandas documentation in Google and select the link that comes up as the first result. After you've reached this point, there's a vast material you can access through the available links. We will only pay attention to the one that is perhaps most fundamental, the user guide section. Let's click on the same title from the top bar and see what we have inside. Basically, the entire information stored here acts as a user manual, where all of pandas has been organized by topic area. So, I'd like to highlight a few tools you may want to go through while getting familiar with the guide. Of course, you can start from the 10 Minutes to Panda section. It is a quick walkthrough of the fundamentals. Then, you can proceed with Intro to Data Structures and Essential Basic Functionality. However, as you are turning into an advanced pandas user, you will rather need the explanations of the topics listed below. For instance, you will most probably appreciate some help while dealing with text files, indexing and selecting data, text data, missing data, nullable data types, and more. Thus, the pandas documentation can be a great point of reference throughout your work as a programmer. While we're in this part of the list, let's explore what's under nullable integer data type. Apparently, this tool has been introduced and changed in earlier versions of pandas. Next, you can find notes about its usage and relation to other topics. As you scroll further down, you will encounter descriptions about its construction, operations, and more. You can also find warnings, if applicable. It is important to note that this entire information has been described in professional language in detail. In fact, the documentation is just as rich and precise about all pandas tools, not just the nullable integer data type. Today, this library has millions of users, which means that even the less frequently required pandas topics will come up as top results in an online search. Therefore, what people typically do is take advantage of this and Google a certain tool directly. To practice, assume that you wanted to explore the pandas sum method, applicable to series. You can open a new tab in your browser and search for pandas.series.sum. In this way, you will obtain a result leading you to the relevant page in the documentation. To be honest, people would actually use the PD convention in their search. So, writing pd.series.sum can deliver the same output. Great! Before we focus on the text and code provided there, I'd like to show you how to get to this page if you are just wandering in the docs. You can use the search bar located on the left part of the page, write series.sum, and access the link to the same page on top of the obtained list. This way, you can finally access the relevant page in the documentation. Interestingly, some parts have been highlighted in yellow. To use the same page without any highlights, you can remove the part of the URL in the bar. That starts from the question mark and runs until its end. Alternatively, you can go to the other tabs and select the obtained first result. Awesome! We are now ready to examine the information about the sum method. Just under the name, we have a short summary of the capabilities of this method. They have been described in detail below. Right below the summary, there's an explanation about what the method does. Second comes the mention that this method is the equivalent of the NumPy sum method. This has to say that sum is a mathematical method. Below this piece of information, you can find the names and detailed descriptions of all associated parameters, as well as their default values. In this case, we are having true, none, or 0 values as default. So, we're not obliged to provide any particular arguments to successfully apply this method on a series object. That's why, as we go to Jupyter, we can apply the sum method to an object we've created and called startDateDeposits without supplying any arguments and still obtain a result. See? On the contrary, if we access the head method through pd.series.head in Google and examine it in the documentation, we will see that we have a default argument of the integer 5 for the in parameter. For this reason, we go back to Jupyter and apply this method to the startDateDeposits object without providing any arguments. We will obtain the first 5 rows of the data as a result. Once more, don't forget that 5, as a default value, will be mentioned in the documentation, while it won't be displayed in your code. In addition to our discussion about the pages in the documentation for various methods, I'd like to encourage you to visit them frequently throughout your work. This will be most appropriate when you want to modify your Jupyter output, but you don't know how. The reason is that docs can provide the answer, since often a given method will be endowed with parameters that can help us modify a result in a certain way. For example, by using this approach, we can discover the in parameter on the page of the head method so that we can provide the value of 10 as an argument in Jupyter and retrieve the desired information. See? There are several other parts of the documentation you need to be aware of to use it more quickly and efficiently. You probably noticed that while we were examining methods so far, their names did not include any parentheses neither in the docs nor in the Google search. However, there are parentheses shown in the summary line on the relevant page in the documentation. In fact, the latter is an indication that we are currently reading about a method, not an attribute. To prove this is the case, we can search for the pandas series size attribute. As we go to the relevant page in the documentation, no parentheses can be observed in the summary line. Another important thing to remember is that if you browse the internet for data frames, the experience will be analogous to the one you had with the series. In principle, you just need to substitute in your search the term series with data frame, or the convention df, and you'll be good to go. For instance, if you type pd.df.head in Google, you will obtain a link to the relevant section in the documentation as a first result. Great! Finally, don't forget that Jupyter allows you to read the docs in a succinct and convenient way. In our notebook file, while applying the sum method to the given object, and the cursor is between the parentheses, we can hold the Shift button and press Tab as many as 4 times to obtain increasingly more information about this method from the documentation. Right? Perfect! To wrap up, please don't forget that as an official and most reliable resource, the documentation has nearly the entire technical information you may ever need. However, this doesn't mean that it is suitable for all situations or programmers' levels. Sometimes it turns out to be insufficient, and as much as we want to, it can't solve every problem in programming you may encounter. That's why we advise you to consider mastering the use of the docs as an incremental, long-term process. To achieve this, you can spend more time inside. However, it will be better to develop the habit to only use it as a support while coding. The key for long-term success in coding in Python is the classical one: practice, practice, practice. To conclude, please remember that in our lectures, we don't disregard the existence of the documentation at all. On the contrary, we aim to provide efficient, fast-track, and time-saving guidance on how to use it when appropriate. These are the required skills to become an independent Pandas user. This will do for now. Thank you for watching.